Meanwhile, Chinese President Xi Jinping has arrived in Vietnam. As he begins a tour of Southeast Asia, Xi will hold talks with Vietnam's Prime Minister, where he's expected to urge a coordinated response to President Donald Trump's trade tariffs. Trump hit Vietnam with a tariff rate of 46%, but that has been paused for 90 days. The country is a key player in the supply chain that delivers products to the United States. Many companies shifted production to Vietnam after Trump imposed tariffs on Chinese firms in 2018 during his first term. Kate Ferguson from DW Business joins me now for more in the studio. Kate, welcome. Xi Jinping in Vietnam, but Vietnam is a country that finds itself walking the tightrope between China and the United States, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So Vietnam is actually in a really interesting position because for the past couple of years, it's quietly been benefiting from the trade tension between the United States and China. And as you mentioned, a lot of international companies in the last couple of years have moved their factories to Vietnam. So there has been a rise in genuinely made in Vietnam products. But there have been other trends as well. So some companies have simply moved their assembly lines to Vietnam. So they're making their finished products there, but all of the components still come from China. And this is something that has angered the United States. Another practice that annoys Trump is transshipping. So this is when companies ship finished products from China to Vietnam, then simply relabel them and export them onward to avoid tariffs. Now, that practice is actually illegal, and Vietnam has promised that they will crack down on both transshipping and on companies that are only assembling their products in Vietnam. But the problem is, even if it does that, it's not going to address the fact that Vietnam has this big trade surplus with the United States. And that's because it simply has a much smaller and poorer consumer market. So the idea of parity of trade balance is just very unrealistic.
Given this being the situation on the ground, what message does President Xi bring with him to Vietnam?
I think Xi Jinping will be very keen to remind Vietnam of its great dependence on China. So Vietnam is an export-driven economy. It sells things like smartphones and clothing all over the world, but it can't do that without components from China, without fabric from China. So it really needs this relationship. It also depends on China for foreign investment. A lot of roads and railways and bridges in Vietnam are being built by China. So I think if they risk angering China on that side, they also stand to lose a lot here.
Stay with us, Kate, because there's also movement on Trump's tariff dispute with the European Union, and EU Trade Commissioner Maroš Šefčovič is in Washington for tariff negotiations. He's one of the first foreign trade officials to arrive in the US capital to discuss the raft of new tariffs President Trump announced on the 2nd of April. 1 week later, Trump paused those levies on all countries except China. Kate, so what is the starting point of negotiations going to be between the US and the EU?
So I think the starting point is going to be the EU's offer of zero tariffs on both sides. And on the face of it, this sounds like quite a bold proposal, but it's unlikely to appease the Americans because their objections to their trading relationship with the EU has more to do with non-tariff barriers. So things like health and safety regulations and VAT, that's a kind of more sophisticated form of sales tax. And the EU is unlikely to budge on those issues. What I think is really interesting, though, is that so far this dispute has been about physical products, soybeans, cars, steel, aluminium. But what it could escalate to is services. So then we would be talking about things like banking, consulting, even streaming platforms. And I think neither side wants to escalate to that extent.
But Donald Trump's team isn't only going to be talking to the EU, they're going to be talking to dozens of other countries as well. What shape will these negotiations take?
Well, they're going to be very busy because generally it takes years to form trade agreements. And what the United States has now given itself is 90 days to form a completely new economic relationship with about 90 countries. So I think the strategy will be to big up the wins and maybe be quieter about the concessions. But I think what's very interesting is at the beginning of this, the Liberation Day tariffs, Trump struck out at the whole world at once. And I think this was a little bit of a strategic error because if you lash out at everyone, even if you're the biggest, you risk people pooling together against you. And I think now, given the fact that he has offer this reprieve to everybody except China, the trade dispute is more on a bipolar level again, and he'll be very keen to exploit that in his negotiations with other countries, urging them to reduce their reliance on China. But we know China is going to do the same thing.
We'll leave it there for the moment. DW's Kate Ferguson, thanks so much. Let's get more from DW East Asia correspondent Melissa Chan joining me now from Taipei. Melissa, what can we expect from Xi's first stop in Vietnam?
Well, Vietnam is in a very interesting position in this U.S.-China trade war. As you mentioned, it was threatened with 46% tariffs. That's been put on hold. It still faces 10% tariffs in the United States, but it is nevertheless a better situation or in a better situation than China. So you have a lot of multinational corporations right now pushing Vietnam to manufacture as much as it can over the next 90 days to the United States. So there's a short-term game, but in the medium to long term, Vietnam needs to come up with a plan because you have people like U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick saying that he doesn't want the United States to rely on Southeast Asia for electronics. Enter Xi Jinping coming on this trip to Southeast Asia, making his first stop in Vietnam, bringing money and financing to build out Vietnam's infrastructure. You need roads, you need paved roads, you need fast trains if you want to manufacture and move things out. So that is the thing that Xi is dangling. But I just want to really quickly remind everyone, though, Vietnam and China are not necessarily aligned, even though they're both ruled by communist parties. Vietnam has centuries of enmity against China. Centuries of China trying to invade Vietnam. So there is a lot of natural distrust between the two sides that Xi is going to have to overcome.
She will also be visiting Malaysia and Cambodia later. What would you say is this region's relationship with China?
Well, ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, Southeast Asia was actually China's largest trading partner last year, not the United States and not the European Union, a fact that most people are likely not to know. So this is a very important region for China, which is why Xi is coming here. He's coming at a time when, frankly, he is coming across as the stable one in geopolitical trade, and he's going to take advantage of this as much as he can. But again, I mentioned the enmity from Vietnam. Both Vietnam and Malaysia, 2 out of the 3 countries, actually have maritime disputes with China in the South China Sea. So there are challenges in terms of the Chinese overture.
Leave it there for the moment. DW East Asia correspondent Melissa Chan in Taipei. Thanks so much.